Hello, everyone. So, this is a summary of the books I've read in the month of June. Going to be a quick summary. I think there's only 8 or 9 books. Pornography and Genocide, The War Against Women. This book gets into violence that happens around the world that's specifically targeted at females. It's an interesting book. Of course, the person uses a different term of genocide. I actually got into that when I did a video just specifically on this book, and it blames pornography for pretty much everything. Not necessarily a coherent argument, but it is a well researched read. Hatred of Democracy, a book I checked out of the library because of the title. And essentially, it's just a rant that has not a lot to do with democracy. Um, the person who wrote this book really hates Jewish people. That's very clear in the beginning. I really have no idea what this book was about after reading it. Campus Rape Culture, Identity and Myths. As I said, the unofficial theme of June for me is murder and mayhem. Campus Rape Culture, Identity and Myths. This is an interesting book. Unlike the previous book I read, which talks about violence against women, is definitely an advocacy book. This book is an advocacy book, but it's more so a history and breakdown of the IRMA itself. For those of you not in the know, the IRMA is the Illinois Rape Myth Acceptance Test. And you might not have ever heard of this, but you may have heard statistics on the news, kind of not reported with the most accuracy, that 39% of men don't feel they need affirmative consent, or 20% of the college thinks that a man is owed sex if he pays for dinner, stuff like that. It's not nearly as simple of a test as the media would have you believe, but then again, this is the country we live in, folks. Outlaw Motorcycle Gangs. So this is by Palgrave, and Palgrave, for those of you who don't know, that's the publishing company, not the actual authors. Palgrave does these very dry, informative criminal justice books, and this one attempts to tackle more so the theories behind how do you classify an outlaw motorcycle gang? Is it a social group that has a criminal element in it? Is it a criminal group that has a social element in it? And it's very hard, to draw a distinction, because not only do biker gangs differ radically from each other, but chapters differ radically from each other. A chapter for the uninitiated is a subdivision bound to a specific geography of a motorcycle club. So I'm gonna take an example and say the Hells Angels. There's the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, but then there's Hells Angels Los Angeles chapter, Hells Angels, and I'm just picking cities. I don't know if there's chapters. Hells Angels Phoenix chapter, stuff like that. This book, again, really good from that perspective. And although Palgrave's books are dry, they are also fairly quick. An essay on the principle of population. So this is Thomas Malthus, and he's sort of the first well-known person to document population growth, and essentially a doomsayer that the population of people is getting way too big, and that if left ungoverned, the population of humans is always going to be greater than the subsistence. In other words, we're going to have too many people, we can't feed them all. So, and this was back in like the 1800s, so a lot of this stuff hasn't come to fruition. How the Other Half Lives. This is essentially a immigrant to the United States, grew up in New York, got rich, and became a newspaper magnate, I believe, and then started to hate New York because of all the poor immigrants. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but I like to say he went full-blown American. So I'm not quite. Actually, yes. The phrase "how the other half lives" is actually not originated from this book. In fact, he quotes it from somebody else. I was wondering that myself. Lots of good information in here. And interestingly enough, as racist as this book is, it ends with a call to reform. Because however insensitive this guy is at pointing out the problems of the poor, he does suggest reforms, and he feels that they're being essentially ripped off, taking smaller renting spaces at a higher rate and have essentially nothing left over. And he gets into how, you know, gangs can form and life can be so cheap when you can't acquire something. Outlaw motorcycle gangs as organized crime groups. And this is essentially just a very concise read. Certain people, such as like me, other people who study crime, people who actually ride motorcycles, are going to know all the information in this book. This gets into stuff like culture, like what the various symbols mean and stuff like that. All in all, pretty fun, but not for seasoned people who read a lot of who study criminology. Avoiding rape on and off campus. So I saw this in the same section I checked out the other couple books, and I thought it would be very interesting to read this to see how social attitude was. I believe this was written in the 80s, and what was good advice, which this has some good advice. The author does say everybody needs to be, very wary of the environments they're in and stuff like that. It also has some advice that is at best useless and may almost cause you problems if anything else. So, oh wait, hold on, there's one more. So, Mitch Albom's The Five People You Meet in Heaven. This book was both a tearjerker and massively uplifting. This is Mitch Albom's first foray into fiction, and it's the first fiction book I've read by him. I've read the 3 other books. I read Tuesdays with Morrie, which is bar none his most famous and his most successfully selling book. And that's because, for a couple reasons, it's a great book, but also some universities make it required reading for things like grieving and if you're going through Kubler-Ross and all that. And then first book I read by him, Have a Little Faith, which is him returning to New Jersey and talking to his rabbi and stuff like that. And the other, Finding Chica was the other one, about a sick child. I skew massively nonfiction, but this book, I'm really glad that I took some time to read it. Been on my list for a while. And it's about a guy who dies on his 82nd birthday. And, when he gets to heaven, he's kind of wondering what it's all been worth. He thinks life has been meaningless. And he's taken on this journey by, you guessed it, 5 people he meets. And he realizes how his life, even if he didn't intend it to, has greatly affected those around him. Like I said, takes you through the full gamut of motions, if you will. So, that's it. That was my June reading list.